Arthur says that he will catch up with them later and leaves. He goes to the location and sees an old building there. Arthur wonders if this is the store his Aunt Tabitha was talking about. He's disappointed to see that. Suddenly, someone asks for some change. Arthur turns around and is surprised to see an old man with glasses there. Arthur wonders how he did not sense him. The old man tells Arthur that it looks like he saw a ghost, and he says that he is an old man asking for some change. Arthur gives him a coin from his pocket. The old man grabs the coin and thanks Arthur. Arthur is shocked to see that he accidentally gave him a silver coin. Arthur looks for some change and tells the old man that he made a mistake, but the old man disappears. Arthur thinks that coin was worth 100 of these. He sadly walks towards the store. Arthur senses some magic on the door's handle and wonders if this store tests its customers. Arthur opens the door and starts coughing from the dust inside. The old man at the counter asks what he can help him with. Arthur is surprised to see that he is the same old man as before. Arthur yells at him to give his money back and says that he told him that he was homeless. The old man tells Arthur that he assumes that he is homeless based on his appearance. He tells Arthur to take one item of his choice for free, and they will call it even. Arthur looks around and asks if there's anything in here worth even a silver coin. He tells Arthur of course there's, he just need the right eye. Arthur starts looking around and asks how old is this shop. There's plenty of dust everywhere. The old man tells him that manual labor is bad for old people like him, and he happens to think this shop is in fine condition. Arthur sees a black cat on the shelf. It runs away. He thinks that he's going to lose his mind if he stays here any longer. After looking for a while, Arthur is disappointed that he didn't find anything worth taking. Sylvie jumps on Arthur and says that he left her behind. Arthur starts smiling. He tells the old man that he didn't find anything. Old man is surprised to see Sylvie. Arthur asks if he is listening to him, and he clears his throat and says yes. Arthur tells him that he can't find anything he wants, so if he can just give him his coin back, he will be on my way. The man sits and tells Arthur that he doesn't have an eye for anything. He throws something at Arthur, and Arthur catches it. It looks like a core. Arthur asks what it is. The old man tells him that he will need it, and he pushes Arthur outside and closes the door. Arthur encounters the black cat again, and after some time, he returns to his family. His mother asks if he found what he was in long for. Arthur says he did. Aunt Tabitha tells him that she would be surprised if he couldn't find anything from their variety of elixirs and medicines because they're quite famous. They start walking towards the store, and Tabitha tells them that it's always overcrowded with students trying to get new training materials. Arthur asks if she's talking about that old place. They turn around, and Arthur and Sylvie are shocked to see a new building there. Lucas is walking inside a cave with a student wearing a brown robe. There's a door inside the cave. Lucas follows him inside the room, takes a look around, and kicks Charles on the ground. Lucas asks what the hell is this supposed to be. There's a masked person sitting on the chair while a lot of followers are standing in front of him. Everyone is looking at Lucas, and the masked person welcomes Lucas. Charles gets up and tells him that he brought Lucas just as asked. The one wearing a mask tells Lucas that he's so glad he could join their crusade. Lucas smirks and asks who said he was joining them, and when Charles said he had something to show him, he was expecting something a little more impressive. Lucas asks who he is and says maybe he's a professor. One of the followers gets angry and tells Lucas that he should be grateful that they are letting him join them. Lucas is annoyed to hear that. The masked man snaps his fingers and burns his follower. He says that was a very courteous thing to say to their new member. The follower starts screaming and asks for forgiveness. Lucas thinks that he would have done the same, but he can't sense his mana level at all. Lucas tells him that he needs more information about their little cult. Lucas asks what they are trying to accomplish and why they need him. He asks if they are the same group going around drugging students. The masked man says that he would like to think that they are doing more than just drugging students. He has big plans bigger than this academy. But for the moment, certain circumstances prevent him from acting. He needs some capable mages to execute his plans while he waits, and he happens to be one of them. He tells Lucas that everyone in this group is a dissatisfied human noble who once took pride that Xyrus was built for only the purest of lineages. He asks Lucas if it doesn't upset him. Lucas asks why should he waste his time and energy on bugs he could squish at any time. These peasants at the academy are no better than the low-class adventurers flailing around with their weapons. Lucas turns around and says that he has no reason to lower himself to their level just to be put on a leash and take commands from him. The masked man says that he is rather a prideful mage who finds lower-class people weak, but his friend Arthur proves that wrong. Lucas freezes and asks what he said. The masked man says that he may have been hailed as a prodigy and pampered with elixirs since his awakening, but he's still no match for Arthur, and the sad thing is that he was never even trying and he knew that. Lucas gets furious and asks who the hell he is. The masked man gets up from his chair and says that he is a mere benefactor who came here for the betterment of this land. He tells Lucas that they could have a mutual benefit in this. Lucas wonders how long has he been watching. The masked man tells Lucas that soon he'll be able to personally strike, and when he does, the frail bond between three races will shatter. He currently has the council and this academy's director occupied, so the stage is set. He just needs him to help with loose ends. Lucas says these loose ends. He's assuming Arthur Lewin happens to be one of them. The masked man starts clapping and says very good. It looks like his elven half didn't affect his ability to think. Lucas asks how he expects him to kill Arthur if he's that strong, and the masked man replies that if he's as strong as he thinks, then he will be able to control the powers that he will bestow upon him, and these powers will be on a different level. Lucas asks if he has a plan to get Arthur Lewin to fight him at his full strength. The masked man says it is simple. Arthur is only human, and he places great importance on his family and his friends, but one person in particular. Lucas smiles and says Tesha. The masked man says yes, an elf as the student leader is just not right. The followers start saying that is disgusting. The masked man asks Lucas if he thinks that just the slightest bit of elf princess blood being shed will get his dear Arthur riled up. Lucas smirks and says sure. Meanwhile, Elijah is sitting in his dorm, cleaning his glasses, but there's a knock at the door. He opens the door and sees Arthur standing there. He says that he has lost his keys. Elijah quickly hugs Arthur. Arthur pats him on the back and says that he is okay. They can't get rid of him that easily. Elijah says that he knows Arthur is like a cockroach. After some time, Arthur packs his bag, and Elijah caresses Sylvie. He tells Arthur that Director Goodsky stopped by yesterday to tell him not to worry about him, but he heard Claire's recount of what happened, so it was hard to believe that he was alive. Arthur asks if everyone is all right. Elijah says that Claire and Curtis checked out of the infirmary this morning, and Tesha is with her grandfather in one of the training rooms. Arthur is surprised to hear that. Elijah tells him that he should go visit everyone so they can see for themselves that he is okay. Arthur says that he should, but he can't handle their questions. He tells Elijah to tell everyone that he's all right because they will trust him. Elijah says that he can do that. They fist bump each other, and Arthur leaves. Elijah lays on the bed and grabs his hair in anguish. Arthur thinks that Director Goodsky should be with the council right now. Sylvie tells Arthur that she feels Mama is in danger, and Arthur says that he's going. Arthur rushes to the training ground and asks what's going on. Arthur's ring starts shining. Sylvie asks what is going on with his ring, and Arthur says that something inside is making it burn. There's smoke everywhere. Arthur sees that Virion is sitting there, and Tess is covered in branches. Arthur asks if that is Tess. Virion says yes, she has been like this since she got back from the dungeon. Arthur asks what is happening to her. He replies that he is not too sure, but her beast will have been acting up and causing problems with the assimilation, almost like it's trying to fight back against Tess's body. He thinks that something was different with the Elderwood Guardian he fought. Even after assimilating with Tesha for so long, it still feels off, like it's mutating. Arthur wonders if this is his fault. He shouldn't have given her the beast core. Suddenly, the branches start attacking Arthur. There's a cut on Arthur's chest. He thinks that could have killed him. The branches start attacking him again. Arthur dodges swiftly. Virion asks if he is okay. Arthur says he's fine, but it seems like his granddaughter has been holding a grudge against him. The attacks become fierce. Arthur jumps back and places his hand on the ground, but the ground tilts and more branches come out of the ground. Arthur starts cutting them down. Suddenly, the core comes out of Arthur's ring and it flies straight to Tess. There's a blast and branches start flying everywhere. Arthur sees that Tess is naked and some branches are holding her up. The core starts going into her body. Arthur quickly jumps towards her and covers her body with a piece of cloth. Arthur carefully puts her on the ground. Virian runs towards them, and he thinks that he has no idea what Arthur did. He tells Arthur that he saved her. Tess gets up and starts rubbing her eyes. She asks why she's on the ground. Virian starts laughing. Tess starts laughing too after seeing them. Virian opens his arms to hug her. She rushes forward and hugs Arthur. Virian thinks that she went the wrong way. Tess starts smiling and says that he is alive. Arthur also smiles at her and says yes, he's alive. After some time, Tess undergoes some tests at the doctor's office. Arthur thinks that he still doesn't understand why that orb that the old man from the elixir shop gave me just flew into Tess like that. It seemed to have calmed her down for now, but he needed to get back to that shop and ask him what it was that he actually gave him. Virian asks the doctor if she's okay. The doctor tells him that her vitals are stable now, and the mana circulation throughout her body isn't impeded. Virian and Arthur smile at each other. The doctor says there's one thing that doesn't make sense. Even as a dark yellow core mage, he wasn't able to measure her mana core. Virian starts walking towards her and says that she can't be right. Arthur asks if she is okay. Virian tells him that he is checking now. He places his hand on her stomach, and Virian falls to his knees with a sudden shock. He says that Tessa's core is almost at the initial silver stage now. Arthur and Virian are walking outside. Arthur asks if it's okay to leave her alone, and Virian says she's just exhausted. After breaking through 3 stages at once, she just needs rest. When she wakes up, he will take her back to the castle right away. Arthur asks Virian if he can tell him more about the lances. Virian says that Cynthia told him what happened. Virian tells Arthur that it takes roughly 20 solid yellow core mages to hold off a single silver core mage. Virian says that he is a mid-silver core mage, and it would take maybe 10 of him to keep one mid-white core mage at bay, and for Cynthia as a high silver mage, it'd take maybe 6 or 7 of her. Arthur asks if he is that weak. Virian is annoyed. He starts pulling Arthur's cheek and says that he is not weak. They are just too strong. They sit on a bench. Arthur asks how do white core mages get so strong, and some of the lances are so young, but they're the most powerful ones out there. He asks what's stopping them from taking over the kingdom. He imagined that the 6 lances can easily take down the thrones. No offense. Virian says none taken. He looks up and says, the lances right now. They only became as powerful as they are after they were knighted. Arthur asks what he means. Virian says that only the royal families have been privy to this information. He tells Arthur that he can't tell a soul what he's about to tell him. Virian asks if he believes in deities. It has to do with how the royal families have stayed in power since the formation of the 3 kingdoms. Virian tells Arthur that during the Beast era, the elves, humans, and dwarves were nomadic, traveling with their own kind and meeting with the other races only for trade. They had differences in cultures and beliefs, but were still on good terms. The 3 races would have lived in times of peace had it not been for the mana beasts that roamed free and sought them out as prey. The 3 races dwindled in numbers as the years passed until one day, a deity descended from the sky and gifted the 3 races the tools to overcome the mana beasts and put an end to this era. This deity appeared before 3 people who were the forefathers of what are now the 3 royal families, the Glader, the Greysunders, and the Aralith families. He bestowed their ancestors with 6 artifacts to be shared among the 3 individuals to become kings, but the 3 kings weren't meant to use these artifacts themselves, and were to instead bestow them upon their 2 most powerful subjects under a soul oath and knighting ceremony. The artifacts also gave them the insights needed to utilize a powerful energy that existed all around them, mana. The 3 kings then commanded the 6 artifact users to spread their newfound knowledge and powers by teaching those who were capable. Thus, creating the first generation of mages, the elves, humans, and dwarves rallied together to push the mana beasts deep into the trenches of what is now called the Beast Glades. Thus, a time of true peace descended upon the land, ending the Beast era and marking the beginning of a new era. The 3 races diverged peacefully and naturally, each seeking a place to call home that best fit their culture and lifestyle. The human king led his people west, where the land was flat and rich in soil, truly a place to foster growth. The elven king shepherded his people north, where they could live in harmony with the magical forest and the living beings inhabiting it. The dwarven king guided his people south, where the earth was abundant in precious ores of metals and gems. With the 3 kings and their lances watching over their people, They truly lived in a time of peace and prosperity. Arthur asks if the lances were the first ones to use magic through artifacts given to their kings by a deity. He says even after accounting for how old this story is, there's something wrong with the end, though. Virion gets angry. He pulls Arthur's ear and says there's something wrong with it because he didn't let him finish. Virion says, basically, that peace lasted only a few generations until the three races slowly forgot about the alliance their ancestors all shared, and their greed took over. As for lances, it's not that they went anywhere. They've existed throughout the generations, nurtured very closely to the royal families, and have been secretly raised to wield an artifact. It's only because of the discovery of the other continent that they decided to unify and make the lances known publicly. Arthur says that he can see why this was kept a secret, even if the lances are soulbound to their kings. If word got out that there were artifacts capable of producing white core mages, Virion says, then Dickathan's fall might very well happen from within. Arthur thanks him for trusting him with this. Virion tells Arthur that he has truly grown. Virion ruffles his hair and says that his body has finally grown into that uselessly mature brain he had since they first met. Virion tells Arthur that he is telling him all of this because he plays a part in all of this. Arthur is confused. Virion tells Arthur that his bond isn't just a mana beast, but she's a deity. Arthur looks at Sylvie, who is sleeping peacefully in his bag. Arthur asks if he is talking about her, and Virion tells him to hear him out for a second. He tells Arthur that deities are beings that are able to ascend from what they consider their mortal bodies and fully harmonize with mana. Arthur asks if it's because she's a dragon. Arthur says she's very strong and smart, but she's not a deity. Virion says there's a reason why even spotting a dragon is considered a blessing in their culture, and it's why he has been keeping Sylvie's true form a secret all this time. Virion tells Arthur that he doesn't think that it's a mere coincidence that the two of them have become bonds. Virion gets up and tells him that the world is changing. He doesn't know what role they will play in it, but whatever the case, he needs to be ready. After their talk, Arthur starts walking with Sylvie. He is looking at the sky. Sylvie asks where they are going, and Arthur says that there is something he needs to check. Arthur goes to the same place where he found the old man, but there's nothing there but a wall. Arthur sees that there is another core on the ground with a note attached to it. Arthur picks it up and reads the note. Arthur quietly leaves after reading the note. In the morning, Arthur is having breakfast at the table with his family. His mother asks if something is wrong. Arthur starts smiling and says not at all. Arthur tells her that he missed her meals at school, and she asks if that is why he has been eating his peas one at a time. Arthur looks down and sees that Sylvie is eating his food. His mother tells him that if he needs to do something, they understand. Arthur says no. He promised they would spend time together for the Aurora Constellate. His father tells Arthur that he has about as much life in him as Vincent does during meetings. He would rather have his normal son after he's taken care of whatever is on his mind. Ellie tells Arthur to bring Sylvie back in one piece and bring back presents. Arthur starts smiling and thanks everyone. He leaves after breakfast. Arthur is holding the note in his hand, and it says if he wants to tell the whole story, come to the West Teleportation Gate at noon tomorrow. A king is sitting on the throne. His advisors tell him that it's as necessary to kill her King Grey. It's of utmost importance to bring stability to their country. Sylvie calls Arthur. He wakes up and says that it was just a bad dream. Arthur wonders why did that memory have to come up now. He pulls the note out of his pocket and thinks that it has to be from that old man. Arthur thinks that he must know something that Virion left out. Arthur is riding on a carriage, and after some time, he reaches the gate. A guard asks him to state his reason for passage and form of verification. He tells Arthur that this is the West Teleportation Gate to the Kingdom of Elenoir, and they need verification to allow anyone through. Arthur brings out a watch and asks if this counts as verification. The guard is surprised to see that Arthur is holding the seal of the royal family of Elenor. He bows and tells Arthur to go this way. Arthur thanks him and walks towards the gate. Arthur thinks that this feels weird. Suddenly, he gets dragged into the door, and he tells Sylvie to hold on to him. They get dragged into a dark room. Sylvie tells Arthur that she is scared, and Arthur thinks that this is the first time she said that. Arthur lights a fire in his palm and wonders what is happening. He feels a strong pressure and falls on his knee. Arthur asks who is there. A voice says that, at last, they have some privacy. The darkness disappears, and Sylvie trembles with fear. Arthur sees a black cat in front of him. Arthur says that it is the black cat that disappeared from the elixir store. The cat transforms into a man and says that he goes by Windsor, and to lessers such as him, they are known as deities. Meanwhile, Cynthia walks through the forest. She remembers the meeting she attended. Muriel asks Cynthia if she's sure the student who found Aaliyah's body isn't hiding anything from her. Alduin says the next course of action is already settled. Dispatch their best tracking mages to see if they can find any evidence that has been left behind. He asks Cynthia if she would be able to join. Cynthia says, unfortunately, she has other affairs to attend to. After the meeting, the owl asks Cynthia why she's so distracted on a mission like this. She says that she wonders if it was the right thing to do, not telling the council that Arthur Lewin was the student that found Aaliyah. The owl says that boy is definitely a mystery. It will not be good for council to be suspicious of him. She says that she considers themselves lucky that he didn't see anything while he was down there. Someone attacks Cynthia. She blocks the attack, but it barely grazed her. Numerous people start attacking her at the same time. She uses her magic to throw them away and tells Avier to finish them. The owl transforms into a large monster and starts killing them. Cynthia starts torturing one of them and says that she can kill him quickly if he tells her what they are planning. He starts laughing and asks if she thinks that he will tell a traitor anything. He tells Cynthia that they're slowly regaining their former strength. She assumed this continent had decades, but they have spies in every corner of this continent. From the forest to the coast, the people of Dicathan have mere years left before the war begins. Cynthia kills him and thanks Avier for cleaning up the mess. He says no problem. Human meat is a little too stringy for his taste, but he managed. Avier asks how the wound is on her back. Cynthia says that she is fine, but this was too easy. They should head for the coast next. Cynthia applies the potion to her wounds, and she has the same blood symbols engraved on her spine. Winsome tells Arthur that he feels this form would be more suitable for the conversation. Arthur says before they continue, he would like to confirm a few things. The guard said this gate was heading to a Lenoir. Arthur asks if there is something wrong with Tesha or Virion, and does this have to do with that orb he gave him. Winsome says that he just had to ensure that he would come through the gate. Winsome shows Arthur a live image of Tess and Virion and says that the elf princess and the previous elf king are fine. Winsome says the elf princess is even more than fine now since that elixir pearl he so generously gave her kept her core from exploding. He tells Arthur to keep the second one because that's for him. Arthur and Sylvie are shocked to hear that. Windsor shows Arthur a map and says that he is a Dicathan citizen, but it's no longer a secret that Dicathan is not the only continent on this planet. He tells Arthur that Dicathan and Alacria have always been governed by them. Though lesser races have regarded them as deities historically, they call ourselves asuras. Arthur asks if they are the same deities that taught them magic. Winsome says exactly. He tells Arthur that he only knows of the artifacts because the old elf king has shared it with him. But the truth of the asuras is something no one on their land knows about. Winsome says that asuras have always been governed by a noblesse oblige of sorts. They were never to interfere with their people or land directly, unless the peace or balance was threatened. But this imperative rule has been broken. Ephitus was once divided into 3 factions made of multiple clans of different races. The ruling clan of each faction had their own priorities, but they all stood by to never raise a hand against the lesser races. However, after Agrona became the new leader of the Vritra clan, he broke that doctrine in an attempt to advance his people. Winsome says that he is aware that he crossed paths with some of their members. He says that the Vritra clan are an anomaly, even amongst asuras. Think of them as scientists. They were constantly studying and furthering insights into the workings of mana. When Agrona came into power, the Vritra's strength grew exponentially. They later learned that Agrona and members of his clan have been experimenting with the lesser's bodies in Alakava to find different ways to enhance their own abilities. Arthur says that is horrible, but he doesn't understand what this has to do with him. Winsome says that it shouldn't have anything to do with him, but he now must be aware of his ties to them. Winsome uses his magic and turns Sylvie into a dragon. He tells Arthur that they have been searching for Lady Sylvie for years, and when they finally found traces of her mana, it led them to a little boy who held a deity in his arms. He tells Arthur that he is currently bonded with the child of his master's only daughter, and the granddaughter of the most powerful being in all of the 3 continents of this world. Arthur is surprised to hear that. He looks at Sylvie and says that Virion is telling him the truth. Winsome tells Arthur that most deities have 3 forms, but it seems like Lady Sylvie has been in that miniature beast form to preserve her energy, although most asuras tend to stay in their humanoid form to save mana. Arthur is surprised to hear about her humanoid form. Winsome says if she hasn't transformed into her humanoid form by now, then it's likely because she isn't able to. Her mana core is still underdeveloped, and considering how things are progressing, they have found signs that Agrona's spies are already on this continent. Windsor says there is a war coming, and although the upper echelons of Ephiodus will never admit it out of pride, his connection with Lady Sylvie can play a crucial role in this. He tells Arthur as long as he agrees to become their ally, there will be no need to separate him from Lady Sylvie. Arthur thinks that if he refuses, they will take Sylvie away. He tells Windsor that this war will involve his continent, and thus his family and friends. Arthur says he will be an ally to him either way, but he is asking him to be a pawn under his control. Winsome is surprised to hear that. He tells Arthur that he is wise for his age, and his mana core is rather well developed as well. But once he and Lady Sylvie arrive in Ephiodus, they will be able to train him well. Arthur and Sylvie are shocked to hear that. Arthur asks if they have to go to Ephiodus. Winsome says yes, Lady Sylvia's power, one that even asuras would kill for, lies inside him barely tapped. So Ephiodus is the only place where he will be able to learn how to harness his potential so that both him and Lady Sylvie can grow stronger, and only then will Dicathan stand a chance against the mages of Alacria. Meanwhile, in the DC meeting room, everyone is sitting at the table. Kathleen thinks that it's only been less than 2 days since Claire and Curtis came back from their field trip, but they can't even rest with all the hate crimes escalating on campus. Claire says they beat and tied Denton to a statue right outside their building just because he's a plebeian and an elf, so they have to stop this radical group now before they do anything more serious. Kathleen thinks that Brother hasn't spoken to anyone since he told her what happened at the dungeon and how he and Claire had to leave Arthur behind. Doradria asks how is the search coming along. She says the professors aren't going to help until they get actual proof. They're too busy worrying about what the stupid donors think. Kai tells her that he has only been able to catch a few faces hanging around, but nothing incriminating, and he kept a close eye on Charles, but it won't look good if they bring him in with no proof. Theodore gets angry and asks what the hell is the point of having a disciplinary committee if they can't do anything about this. Claire says that they will just have to wait for Director Goodsky to come back. Fairith says that he can't believe they're doing all of this because they're unhappy with how the school is progressing and they are acting like this after Arthur became the teacher. Kathleen gets up in anger and says that Arthur being a professor was proof of his abilities despite being from a humble background. There should be no reason for them to be using this as an excuse. Fairith grabs her hand and says, of course, they know this, and he hates them even more for using his rival as an excuse. Claire says they just don't know what to do. Kathleen says if Arthur were here, he would know what to do. Elijah interrupts the meeting and says that he is sorry for intruding, but he is glad that they are all here. He tells them that Arthur, but suddenly, the ground starts shaking. Everyone starts running outside. Elijah falls to the ground. Kathleen thinks that equality has always been important to her mother. She remembers being young and refusing to take lessons with other students who weren't princesses like her, not knowing better. But her mother told her that refusing to play with anyone because they're not princesses isn't good. She wants her to know before she's a princess. She's a person, so it doesn't matter if someone is a king or queen, a servant or a powerful mage, or even an elf or a dwarf. Everyone is different and special in their own way, but a person is a person. Never hate someone for something they can't and shouldn't change. Kathleen thinks that their mother was sensible and smart, and she cared for everyone. She always disciplined her and her brother for any type of discrimination they might have unknowingly shown. Her mother fought hard for a building on campus to serve as both a museum and a monument to the alliance between the 3 races. The Tri-Union Hall was supposed to be that symbol of peace and culture. It wasn't supposed to be targeted. Kathleen is shocked to see that building burning in flames while everyone is running outside in panic. Everyone starts helping the injured. Professor Glory arrives there with her beast. She tells her students to bring the injured here. Claire carries an injured person and gets on top of the beast. Glory tells her to get them to the hospital. Water mages start putting out the fire, and after some time the fire is extinguished. Smoke starts coming out of the building, and it is ruined. Charles comes out of the building. Kathleen yells at him. She brings out her wand and starts running towards him. Theodore grabs Charles by the collar and picks him up. He throws him on the ground and says that they need to ask him a few questions. Charles starts calling for help. A professor arrives there and says that this is not the time to be harassing students. Charles points at Theo and tells the professor that this DC officer grabbed him out of nowhere. He doesn't know what is happening. He barely survived the explosion. Theo gets furious and uses his gravity magic on Charles, saying that he has been seen multiple times with the radical group. And now he and his little friends are at the scene of the crime, and he wants him to believe that he's innocent. The professor asks if the disciplinary committee officers just going around and making baseless accusations now and without any proof. Glory stands between the two and she tells Theo that he can't take in a student without proof and they can't afford to be rash right now. Kathleen starts trembling with rage. Curtis pats her on her arm and tells Theo to listen to Professor Glory. Theo lifts his magic from Charles and starts walking away. Kathleen looks at Charles and sees that he is grinning. After some time, Elijah is practicing in the woods. He sits down and thinks that it is easy to communicate with the earth, but his control is weak. Even after reaching the light orange stage, he still has a long way to go. Maybe he should have told Arthur about it back then so he could have helped him train. He thinks that if Arthur was here today, he probably could have stopped the fire by himself. He remembers telling everyone about Arthur being alive. Claire starts smiling and says she knew he would survive. Curtis is relieved to hear that. Elijah wonders if they still would have been worried if they knew of Arthur's true abilities. He figured that with Arthur's skills and power, he'd be popular, but even without all that, he has people like the DC members and Princess Tesha that genuinely care for him. Elijah wonders if it would have been the same for him if he hadn't grown up with dwarves. He thinks that they are both freaks of nature, but the only difference is that they work in Arthur's favor. Elijah again starts remembering what he saw in the training room. He slaps his face and says that Arthur has always been there for him. Elijah gets up and thinks that if he wants to stand next to Arthur, then he needs to get stronger. He starts practicing his earth spike magic again. After some time, there is a line of people with their carriages waiting to pass through the gate. A person asks how long it is going to take, and another one says that it looks like they will go in by the end of the day, but they should be glad that they can even do business here again thanks to the council's formation. Arthur and a girl start walking towards the gate. The person gets angry and grabs Arthur by his shoulder. Arthur asks if he can help him, and he tells Arthur that there's a line to get into the city. The girl tells him that this person is a guest of Elenoir and has urgent business to attend. He smacks her hand away, and another person comes from behind and tells Roger to calm down. Roger says no. He points at Arthur and asks why he gets to skip the line when they have been waiting for so long. Arthur slaps his hand away and says he's skipping this line because there's a valid reason for it. Roger says that it looks like his father didn't beat his spoiled ass hard enough. Roger grabs Arthur by his collar and lifts him in the air as his body starts emitting fire. He tells Arthur that he has enough control so he will not burn him alive. Arthur says that if he wants to burn him alive, then he needs to do at least this much. Blue flames start bursting out of Arthur, and Roger falls to the ground, scared to see those blue flames. Arthur starts walking towards the gate, and he remembers his conversation with Windsor. Arthur asks if he has been trying so hard to find Sylvie and why it took so long for him to find them. He asks if his beast will carry Sylvia's mana signature. Windsor points at him and says that by hiding his bond's insignia with one of Lady Sylvia's feathers, he also hides the presence of her signature. Winsome tells Arthur that he did well, but now it's time for him to come to Ephiatus. Arthur arrives at a castle. Two guards ask the girl who he's. Arthur shows them his watch. The guard asks if it has been verified. The girl nods and Arthur is annoyed and wonders what's the point of having this badge if no one believes it's real. The guard bows and tells Arthur to please go ahead. Suddenly, there is a huge bang and the earth starts shaking. The guard tells Arthur to get back. The castle's wall is destroyed. Someone appears from the smoke and tells Arthur that it's good to see him again. Arthur asks Varian if there's an intruder. He starts coughing and asks if he would be having this much trouble against an intruder. Tess calls for her grandpa and says that she can't control it. Varian tells Arthur that it turns out her body is already fully integrated with the Elderwood Guardian's beast will. Arthur is shocked to hear that and asks how could she already be fully integrated with an S-class beast. He wonders if it has something to do with the marble he got from Winsome. Varian tells Arthur that even though she's awake and aware, Tesha can't control the vines. They've just been multiplying with each one he cuts down. He tells Arthur to give it a shot, and he'll cover him. Varian orders the guards to leave because they will only get in their way. Arthur and Varian get ready to fight the vines. They rush towards Tess, but the vines start attacking Arthur and cut him on his face. Arthur thinks that using any fire spells in this environment would be too risky. He starts slashing the vines using wind magic. Suddenly some strange marks appear on his face and the color of his hair changes to white. Arthur starts moving towards Tess at insane speed. He tells her to keep the vines from closing. Tess looks at Arthur and says that she can't hold much longer. Tess starts pushing the vines away from her. Arthur comes near her and says that it is okay. He takes her in his arms and says that he got her. Arthur freezes the vines and breaks them to pieces. He jumps on the ground carrying Tess and his hair turns back to normal. He asks if she is alright. Tess says that she hates how she always needs his help. Arthur says that it is not her fault. It's because he gave her the beast will. Tess punches Arthur and says no. He gave her the opportunity to grow. She smiles and says it's up to her now to learn how to use it and get strong enough to fight by his side. Arthur bumps his fist with her and says that he will be waiting. Winsome is looking at them through a portal and says that it is too early to tell him everything, but one day that boy will have to learn everything about Lady Sylvie, especially the truth behind her lineage. Arthur and Tess are looking in each other's eyes. Varian clears his throat and says that he hates to ruin the mood, but they should think about the people that'll have to clean this up and get going. A large part of the building is destroyed. Arthur asks where should they go. Varian winks and says somewhere that isn't blasted to pieces. After some time, they are riding on the carriage. Tess is sleeping. Varian says it was his fault. He encouraged Tess when she wanted to release the first phase of her beast will. They both thought she could control it since her body was fully integrated. At the very least, he thought he would be able to keep her in control. Arthur thinks that since her integration process was accelerated, she skipped the training phase and never got a chance to test its control before. Arthur looks at Tess and thinks that he can feel that her beast will is different from his. Even though it's fully integrated, it still feels like it's fighting back against her mana. Arthur tells Varian that Tess needs to be more careful. It could be dangerous for her and everyone around her if things escalate like this again. Varian gets furious. He starts yelling at Arthur and says that he was just a grandfather that got a little excited and proud over his granddaughter's progress. Varian sighs. He looks out the window and says it might be best to get a seal to suppress her mana until she gains better control. But then again, she would be defenseless if something were to happen and she can't remove it in time. Maybe they can start with a protective artifact for her. Arthur smirks and says a protective artifact seems like a good move, and if it makes him feel better, he will stay by his precious granddaughter's side as much as he can. Varian smirks and says he's sure he will. Varian gets serious and tells Arthur that he knows he teases him about Tess a lot, but what are his intentions about his granddaughter? He asks if he has ever thought about marrying her. Arthur is surprised to hear that. He thinks for a while, and he is about to say something, but Varian interrupts him and says that Tess is a bit rough around the edges, and her parents, and he may have spoiled her a bit, but she's a good girl. Plus, the two of them have history, and he can't just find that anywhere. Arthur says that he thought that elves traditionally dated and married a lot later. Varian tells Arthur that, with how fast Dicathan is changing, they need to change with it. Varian tells Arthur what he truly wants to know is that if he likes his granddaughter. Arthur says that he does, but he can't say for certain if it's love or not. He hopes he can find the answer with more time, and he would like to improve himself before even thinking of asking for his granddaughter's hand in marriage. Varian starts smiling and tells Arthur that his head is in the right place. Sylvie starts laughing and says she knew Papa liked Mama. Arthur is surprised to see that she's awake. He looks at Varian, and Varian says don't worry about Tess because she will sleep through anything. Tess starts sweating and thinks that Arthur just admitted that he likes her. She can't believe her grandpa got him to admit it, so she starts freaking out. Tess thinks that she's breathing too fast, so she tells herself to keep her eyes shut and slow down her breathing. She wonders if Arthur can hear how fast she's breathing. Varian looks at Tess and asks why she's sweating so much. Arthur says maybe she's having a nightmare. Arthur thinks that he should get Ellie a bond, one that's strong and large enough to protect his sister if it ever came down to it. Furthermore, if the bond can protect Ellie's life, surely it can also protect her from any weak-willed boys that try to woo her. Arthur has a sinister look on his face. Varian tells Arthur that he doesn't know what he is thinking, but stop that. After a while, the carriage stops, and Varian and Tess step out. Tess is surprised to see her mom there. She runs towards her and hugs her. Arthur looks around and wonders where they are. Tess's father tells Arthur that it's good to see him again. He says that it seems like he's always there whenever something happens with their daughter. Her mother says they can't thank them enough, but perhaps one of them would be so kind as to explain why they were redirected on their trip home and why they were told that their manor is under construction. Alduin starts laughing and asks if they finally managed to destroy it or something. Tess says not completely. Her parents are shocked to hear that. Varian says it is nothing to be too concerned about. He was training Tess when he got a little too excited with his first phase and hit a part of manor. Varian says it will be all fixed up in no time. There's just a bit of a draft in the manor that might make it uncomfortable. Besides, they are long overdue to visit Rinia. Tess says that they haven't seen grandmother Rinia in a long time. She asks if everything is all right. Varian looks concerned and says that she has just been occupied, and Rinia has told him a few times how interested she's been in Arthur's future. Arthur says that he is curious about that in general, and he asks where Elder Rinia is. They start walking in the woods. Varian tells everyone that Rinia has chosen to isolate herself near the edge of the kingdom. She wouldn't tell him why, but he almost died from her traps and defenses the last time he visited unannounced. He tells her that they are visiting ahead of time, but to stay alert, Arthur wonders what Elder Rinia needs to protect herself from. Sylvie starts hunting for food. The rodent starts running. Sylvie shoots a blast from her mouth and kills the rodent. She happily grabs it in her mouth and starts walking with everyone. Arthur and Alduin walk together. He tells Arthur that his bond continues to intrigue him, and Arthur tells him to. Alduin thanks Arthur for taking such good care of his daughter. From what he has heard, Tesha made it out of some dangerous situations. Arthur says it is nothing. Tess also helped him a lot. Alduin asks how, and Arthur replies it keeps him sane at times. Alduin starts laughing and says that's not exactly what he expected a 13-year-old boy to say. Alduin tells Arthur that for some reason he can't help but view him as an adult. Arthur thanks him for his kind words. Alduin says he didn't mean that as a compliment. He says no parent wants to see their child grow up so fast, let alone see their child carry the burdens that only adults should. Alduin tells Arthur that it was because of him that the council was able to be formed. Arthur is surprised to hear that Alduin says, if he's being completely honest, that he didn't have the best impression of humans after the war. He lost his mother because of them and never forgave them for it, and he almost lost his daughter years later after slave traders trespassed into their forest. Then came a young human child who brought his daughter safely back home, and he had the courage to not only save her from those slave traders, but also chastise the Elven King. Being lectured by a human child was just the wake-up call he needed. Alduin tells Arthur that he is not opposed to bringing him into the family. Muriel tells Arthur that he may act cool like this, but it's not once or twice that her husband has been yearning to see him again. Alduin is embarrassed to hear that. Muriel tells him that if he wanted privacy, then he should have conjured a wind barrier. Varian starts laughing. Suddenly, Varian tells everyone to quiet down. There is some movement in the bushes. Rinia appears from behind the bushes, and she looks scary. Arthur jumps to attack her, but Varian catches Arthur and saves Rinia. Rinia gets scared. She starts yelling at Arthur for swinging his sword at her. Tess hugs her and says that it is good to see her. She starts smiling and says it is good to see her darling again. After that, they start walking towards her home. Varian says he thought they were supposed to meet at the entrance. Rinia says that they took so long, so she decided to make sure that they were not lost. She pulls Arthur's cheek and says he has grown into quite the handsome young lad. If he were just 100 years younger, She might have snatched him up for herself. Arthur says that after almost peeing himself from seeing her as a ghost, he is not sure how to take that. Rinia gets annoyed. She tells him to ask Varian how stunning she was. Men would fall over their feet for her as soon as she walked into the room. Muriel tells Arthur that it's true her mother often told her how all the girls her age had been jealous of Aunt Rinia. Varian pulls out his tongue and says that she was average at best. Rinia says, of course, he would think like that. There was only one girl who ever caught his eye. She quickly turns around and apologizes to Varian for being a little insensitive. Everyone starts walking silently towards her home. She lifts some branches and walks past a magic barrier. There's a large waterfall. Rinia starts walking towards a cave beneath the waterfall, and everyone is amazed by that. Rinia warns everyone not to conjure any light. They will make their way in the dark. They start walking inside the cave. There's a house built inside. Rinia opens the door and says welcome to her home. There's much to discuss. After some time, Rinia is serving everyone tea. Arthur takes a sip of the tea and wonders what sort of deviant magic allows for a space to be bigger inside than it is outside. Suddenly, everyone starts falling asleep. Arthur starts drinking his tea again. Rinia says that she thought he would be more alarmed seeing everyone fall unconscious. Arthur says that he has been through a lot these days, so it's becoming harder to get surprised, but she probably knew that already. Rinia says that he is right, and she feels as though she needs to tell him about her powers as a diviner. Arthur is surprised to hear that, and thinks that there was almost nothing in the textbooks at Xyrus about this deviant form of magic since it was so rare. Rinia starts laughing and says it seems like he's quite interested. She explains that deviants outside of those who can harness the higher forms of the 4 basic elements have to find their own source of power to fuel their magic. This is different from regular mages who draw power from the mana particles in the atmosphere. For example, his mother is an emitter and has healing capabilities that elemental recovery spells can't compare to. She has met quite a few deviants in her lifetime that all had unique properties to their magic. And they all have one thing in common, their own pool of mana. They draw upon it to power their magic. This is different from an elemental deviant such as him. For diviners, their powers are also developed differently. Their powers can awaken at any point in their lives and mostly come in erratic bursts. Blurred images of the future flash through their minds quite often. Most of the time, they're a little too vague and minute to make anything out of. These flashes of the future don't use any of their mana at all. Actually, Rinia says it doesn't seem like a very useful power if she can't control it. Arthur asks what about the spell she used when he was younger, the one to locate his parents and let him speak to them. Rinia tells him that was a spell she made that involves using her powers as a diviner to project an image. She tells him that true divination is reading the future, knowing when and where something is going to happen. Arthur says that he doesn't understand. Rinia tells him that the diviners shorten their own lifespans each time they choose to consciously look into the future. That is the true power of a diviner. Everything else is just a collection of useful little spells that can't be considered anything more than hat tricks. Rinia asks if he remembers earlier when she mentioned Varian's wife. Arthur says he does. Rinia says that her name was Lania, and she was also a diviner, one much more powerful than her, and her unconscious divinations and prophecies would be much longer and more detailed than hers. Coupled with her beauty and grace, she held the envy and admiration of every female elf of their generation. She was the pride of their kingdom, and the citizens idolized her. After she and Varian fell in love, they got married in a beautiful ceremony. Fate seemed to be smiling upon them. However, fate was cruel to them both. The war between elves and humans was nearing its end, and there was talk of a treaty in the air. Tensions were still strong, and they suspected that the humans still wanted to assert their power. And they were right, because the then king of Sapin carried out one final act against the future heir to the elven throne. Arthur is surprised to hear that. Rinia says that Varian was the target of an assassination. Varian's wife was tormented by visions of his death, and her prophecies told her little about his death. And if she tried to change something in these prophecies, outcome would only lead to a different cause of death. Varian only knew the toll it was taking on his wife, and begged her to stop, but she continued behind his back out of desperation. When she looks into the future just once, she can feel the days, weeks, sometimes months, drain out of her body. Lania did it almost every day for the one she loved. In the end, She was able to keep Varian alive long enough for the current King Glader to stage a revolt and take down his father to end the war. Lania succeeded, but she burned up so much of her lifespan in the process and died a few weeks later in his arms. She hated Varian for a long time because of this, and she hated her sister for leaving her behind in this vast world. Arthur is surprised to hear that. He looks at Varian and thinks that Varian is always so cheerful and loves joking around. He never would have thought that he had such a tragic past. Sylvie wakes up and sees that everyone is asleep. Renia tells Arthur that she doesn't want his sympathy because she has used the same powers as the one who eventually killed her sister to look into his future. Arthur asks why. Sylvie jumps on Arthur and glares at Renia. Renia says that it seems like his bond can sense he's a little bit troubled. Arthur says that their emotions are connected. She tells Arthur that she was getting glimpses of his future before she even met him or his bond for the first time. Arthur asks if that is common. She tells him that never happened to her before. Renia tells Arthur that a new era is coming and seems to be at its epicenter. He asks why him. She tells Arthur that this is a tricky question and that telling him too much right now can affect the outcome. But telling him too little defeats the point of her search for a better outcome. Arthur asks if she is sacrificing her lifespan for this, and he asks if Varian knows. Renia smiles. She shakes her hand and says she has lived long enough so she might as well use it to help the future, but it seems like by looking into his future, she might have made some rather troublesome enemies and hence the remote hideout. Arthur is about to say something, but she stops him and says that it was her choice. She tells Arthur that he will face many hardships. Whatever future he decides, that will remain constant. There will be enemies and obstructions in his path, so he needs an anchor and an end goal. She asks Arthur what he wants to accomplish in his life. That will be what determines his path. She tells him that she will leave him with two things. One is that people do bad things for good reasons, so don't take things at surface level. And two, often, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one on the throne, leading the forces, but the abandoned soldier who has nothing to lose. Renia apologizes and says that she can't tell him more. Arthur asks what if he fails to make the right decision. She puts her hand on his shoulder and says sometimes the right choice isn't always the best choice. Arthur starts pondering. Renia tells him to get some rest before going back tomorrow. Meanwhile, Lucas is standing in the woods with some students. Lucas is holding a drug in his hand and asks if this is the drug they gave Marquois. Charles replies that Marquois took it willingly. His body couldn't handle it. Lucas asks if he hasn't tried it yet. Charles turns his head in disappointment. Lucas asks if he wasn't even chosen to take this, and he starts laughing and says that it is embarrassing. Lucas thinks that their cores are weaker and the drug will kill them the moment it enters their system. Charles gets angry at Lucas and tells him to take the drug. There's so much more they need to do before tomorrow. Their informant warned them that the DC officers are getting bolder, and they need to act now. Lucas attacks him using fire spell. Charles falls to the ground and Lucas asks how long he's going to keep talking big when he's nothing more than a little messenger boy. Lucas drinks the drug and a dark energy starts emitting from his body, and Lucas falls down. Everyone starts laughing at him. They say that it looks like he can't handle the drug any better than Marquois. Charles tells Lucas to bark all he wants and then go hide behind his family because he's nothing more than a useless piece of meat. He stomps on his head and says if he's going to die, then be quick about it and stop wasting their time. Lucas grabs his leg and starts burning him. Charles starts screaming in pain. Lucas throws him away, and he hits the tree. Lucas is emitting a mysterious dark aura. He remembers his conversation with his brother. Lance Baron asked him if he thinks he is good enough to waste time on starting meaningless fights and wasting thousands of gold on trying to make his pathetic self stronger, or if he's going to finally try on his own. Lucas starts grinning. He starts laughing hysterically. The other students start trembling with fear. One of them starts running away. Lucas attacks him and burns him to crisp. The other student runs towards Juno to save him, but it's too late. She gets furious and attacks Lucas using her water bullets. Lucas's fire is so strong that he starts evaporating the water. He rushes towards her and grabs her by the throat. Blood starts coming out of her eyes and nose. Lucas says he just wants them to know that he's stronger than Marquois. Lucas chokes her to death and turns his attention to Charles. Charles starts crying, and Lucas tells Charles to try and call him a useless piece of meat again. Charles starts screaming, and there's a huge blast. In the morning, everyone is sitting on the table and Rinia is serving them food. Sylvie is disappointed to see the food. Rinia smiles and says it looks like the calming herbs she put in the tea last night were a tad too effective. She didn't think it would knock everyone out like that. Alduin says it is alright, they probably needed it. Virian grabs his head and says that he had urgent business he wanted to attend to. Rinia asks did it have something to do with Sweet Tesher reducing a rather large portion of the castle that Alduin and Muriel spent years renovating into a pile of. Virian puts the food in her mouth and says these vegetables are great, she should try some. Rinia puts something on the table. She tells Tess that this should help in keeping her beast will in check. Tess opens the box and sees a bracelet. She wears the bracelet. Alduin thanks Rinia for always looking out for Tess. Rinia says it's her pleasure. After some time, she points at a door and says this should help take Arthur and Tess back to Xyrus City. Arthur says he thought that teleportation gates had been around since ancient times and were under tight regulation by the kingdoms. He asks if she's allowed to have a personal one just like this, and Rinia starts grinning. Tess hugs her parents. Muriel says they will visit her soon. Virian tells Tess be sure to stop by Goodsky's office before school starts. He haven't heard from her in a while and want to make sure that old Coot is still breathing. Tess says she will. Tess hugs Rinia and thanks her for having them. She hugs her back and says that she cherish every moment with her. Arthur looks worried. Sylvie asks if he is alright. Arthur says he's good. Arthur, Tess, and Sylvie wave at everyone, and they pass through the gate. Tess asks if there aren't supposed to be guards in front of each gate. Arthur says that he heard a lot of staff took time off during the Aurora Constellate since trade is blocked during this time. Maybe they're just short-staffed. The sky is filled with bright colors. Tess says no matter how many times she sees it, the Aurora Constellate really is amazing from Xyrus. Sylvie tells Arthur that the sky is still broken, and they reach outside Arthur's home. Sylvie starts running to open the door. The door opens, and Arthur is surprised to see Jasmine there. Jasmine says it is about time he showed up. Helen and Durden are also there. Helen tells Arthur that she can hardly recognize him. Durden says that he's grown. Adam tells Durden to stop acting all cool. He asks Arthur if he noticed something different about this bear. Arthur is surprised to see his new hairstyle. Adam says at first he thought he was copying him, but it turns out he was the inspiration for this horrific thing. Angela rushes and hugs Arthur. She says that he has gotten even cuter. Tess is jealous to see that. Angela hugs Tess and says she's the cutest little elf. Reynolds starts smiling and says they should let them in now. Ellie tells Arthur that she is glad he didn't come back half dead this time. Ellie grabs Tess's hands and says hello. Everyone starts going inside. Tess says that she only planned on stopping by to say hello before heading back to school. There's a lot of student council work that she missed, and she also has to see Director Goodsky. Arthur asks if she is alright. Tess starts smiling and says she just wanted to get her to help her adjust to this since it seems like she will have it on for a while, and as the president, she shouldn't be here having fun when even Lilia is still at school. Arthur thinks that he told Gramps he would stay with Tesha since most of her magic is suppressed right now. Tess punches Arthur and says that she will be fine. Arthur says okay, but don't work too hard and get some rest. Her monocore is still a little unstable. Alice gives Tess her shawl and says if she must go, then at least keep herself warm. Tess thanks her and leaves. Everyone waves goodbye. After some time, everyone is drinking and eating. Adam says it is a shame that the princess had to leave, but the night is young, and for once, he doesn't have to share a bedspread with Durden. Jasmine tells Arthur that she was worried about him when she was away. Helen takes her away and says this is her 23rd time telling him that. Arthur starts smiling nervously. He goes outside with Helen to get some fresh air. Helen says that she heard that he has taken over the torch in his father's role of worrying his mother. Arthur says it seems to be the one skill that he keeps on getting better at without even trying. Helen tells him that he is made for bigger things. She tells Arthur to stay anchored and always remember what he is fighting for. Arthur remembers that Rinia also told him the same thing. Arthur asks if she is drunk, too. She starts smiling and says, maybe. Helen gets up and says that she's just a little worried about the discovery of the new continent. Helen says she's going to go back inside to keep her teammates from possibly burning this place down. Arthur says he will go up in a bit. Helen winks at Arthur and says that he should sneak back up to his room and get some rest. Arthur thinks that he doesn't know why he was brought to this world, but he refuses to believe that he was sent here to be some chess piece. Protecting the smiles and laughter of everyone he has come to love in this new world is his reason, and that's the fate he will create. Meanwhile, the masked man tells his subordinates that everything is in place. Everyone is wearing black uniforms, and they are on their knees. The masked man summons a lot of monsters through a portal and says let the attack commence. Meanwhile, at Zyrus Academy, Kai is holding a crystal in his hand. Theo asks if it's done yet, and Kai replies, almost, just waiting for Doradria to come so he can activate it. Claire asks if he is sure he doesn't want to join them. Curtis says those insane cultists are going to launch a full-scale attack soon. They need to keep themselves warmed up and prepared for battle. Kai says that he has been out scouting the whole day, so he thinks any more training will be more harmful than good. Doradria comes running carrying mana-resisting bands and says that she is sorry for being late. Her foot gets stuck and she falls to the ground. Curtis picks up a band and asks if she is trying to make them waste all of their mana, training with these things when an actual battle might occur soon. Claire picks her up and says that she means well. Doradria shows her tongue to Curtis. Theo tells Kai to turn on the barrier. Kai turns on the barrier, and a red circle appears around them. Kai is sitting outside the barrier. Claire says it is weird, and she asks why the barrier is red. Curtis tells Kai that there's something wrong with the barrier, so shut it down. Theo punches the barrier, but it doesn't budge. Kathleen says there's an emergency kill switch somewhere around here. Claire starts looking for the switch on the ground. She picks up a tile, and everyone is shocked to see that the switch has been destroyed. Suddenly, the barrier opens up from behind, and numerous enemies enter it. Claire tells everyone to get information. Theo, Doradria, and Curtis get in front and start attacking the enemy. Claire uses her fire magic to take down numerous people in one attack. She tells everyone that they have to get outside through the opening and help Kai. Lucas gets annoyed and says she still doesn't get it. Lucas arrives there and tells everyone that Kai is the one who trapped them all in here. Doradria says that he is lying. Lucas says he has no reason to lie when he can squash them easily like bugs. Lucas rushes towards them and attacks everyone at the same time. Claire attacks Lucas using her fire, but Lucas also attacks at her with fire. Doradria barely tackles Claire and saves her from getting burned. Claire notices an opening in the barrier. She thinks that Doradria's mana resistance bands must have interfered with the formation of the barrier. She tells Doradria that they can make an opening big enough to escape through. They need to get everyone back here. Doradria says that is easier said than done. She doesn't know what Lucas took, but he's stronger than even the professors right now. Lucas is about to kill Faerith, but Theo attacks him from behind. Lucas grabs Theo by his throat and says, "Look at this bug trying to crush a person." Someone notifies Lucas on a device that target has almost arrived. Lucas throws Theo away and says it is showtime. More cultists start running inside the barrier. Kai asks Lucas where he is going. He is supposed to help him capture them. Lucas says he has a more important mission to attend to. Kathleen creates an ice barrier between them. Claire and Doradria creates an opening in the barrier. Everyone is trying to get out of the barrier, but the enemy breaks the ice wall and starts rushing towards them. Doradria starts running to fight the enemies, and Theo says that he is not leaving her behind. She kicks him and tells him not to be an idiot. An enemy attacks Doradria and says die dwarf, but an attack comes from somewhere and hits the enemy. Faerith tells Doradria that he has her back, and she tells Faerith to let him do it. Claire tells everyone to scatter and search for professors. Theo asks why is it so loud outside. Everyone is shocked to see that monsters are going on a rampage outside. Meanwhile, Tess is riding on a carriage. She thinks that she didn't want to worry Arthur, but her body feels out of sync right now and her mana core is completely exhausted. She looks at her bracelet and says, hopefully, Director Goodsky can help her get used to this. The carriage stops abruptly. Tess braces herself, gets outside, and asks if everything is all right. She is shocked to see that there is a red barrier outside the academy. The coachman asks the princess what they should do, and Tess says to turn back quickly. Suddenly, someone attacks the carriage with fire, and it gets destroyed. Tess gets blown away by the blast. Lucas says that he can't believe she's here and she's alone, and it looks like she's feeling a little lonely. Tess looks up and sees the person on fire. She starts using her magic and thinks that she can still save him. Lucas attacks him again and says it is rude to ignore someone when they are talking. Lucas tells Tess to worry about herself. Tess gets up and tells Lucas to shut up. She uses her magic, but Lucas starts walking towards her and says she can barely keep her eyes open. Tess thinks that Rinnia's bracelet is keeping her beast's will in check, but it's also limiting her magic. Lucas grabs her by the collar and tells her to stay nice and pretty like this, and that maybe she will even end up liking him more than that pathetic boyfriend of hers. Tess says the fact that he's not killing her right away means that she's not his target. Lucas throws her on the ground and says that she doesn't know anything. Tess starts trembling and says that she didn't know his inferiority complex has reached a new level. Lucas slaps her and says just because he can't kill her doesn't mean that he needs her in one piece. Tess starts bleeding from her mouth and says good. She grabs Lucas's arm and says she has no intention of leaving in one piece. She grabs Lucas and starts stabbing him using her magic. Tess thinks that she needs to hold on. She can't let him use her to lure Arthur. Lucas gets furious. He unleashes his firepower and breaks her spell. Tess falls to the ground. Lucas puts her bracelet back on her wrist and says that he can't let whatever magic she is using kill her. Lucas grabs her by her hair